For more awesome content, head to ystech.org, link in the. After a long time, I finally decided to upgrade my computer. I went with the option of the 3700X, and you'll see that in another video for my reasoning and how much I got it for. I can actually tell you guys that now. I got off TradeMe for $330. It's an amazing steal and it's a great processor. So here I've got my 3700X installed in a tester motherboard. Now this motherboard is actually the A520M board that only cost me $40 from TradeMe. A really good steal. Link in the description or out in the top right if you guys want to see it. So I tested it in here for about a week before I put it in my build because I had exams and I didn't really want to risk having online exams and installing a new CPU. So I tested it on this guy and it worked really well. I did a few tests with Cinebench and I decided to put it in my build because it's working, and obviously say that to the seller that it's all goods and it's working pretty nicely. So what you're going to see here today, besides a long-winded explanation for the intro, is you're going to see me uninstall the CPU. It's not too much of a process, it's pretty easy. You basically go in a crosswise pattern for uninstalling the CPU heatsink here. You see it's a little bit out there on one side, so I unscrewed too much in one place, but usually just want to go in a crosswise pattern and in a diagonal pattern usually, and go nice and slow, so even pressure when you're taking them out. And it's an AMD CPU cooler, so it's pretty easy to take out. So there's the 3700X there. I'm pretty used. I use a Knoxville NTH1, as you can see there, and basically, so now I need to take the CPU out, or actually, I'm gonna clean it first. So, yeah, I'm touching it, and basically, I'm gonna get some coffee filters. You can get them in New Zealand. They're relatively cheap, and you basically take the coffee filter and some rubbing alcohol, usually of 70 to 80% or above, and of the alcohol amount in it. And you just dip it in the rubbing alcohol, the isopropyl alcohol, and you just want to wipe it off nicely off the CPU. Just make sure you get as much off as possible and try not to spill it onto the motherboard anywhere, but it's fine if you get a little bit of spillage of the isopropyl alcohol. It usually dries up really quickly, but try not to spill it anyways. So I'm going to do that right here, and you guys will see that. Once I finished cleaning the CPU off, and I made sure that I could get as much thermal paste off as possible, I get the lever on the side of the CPU and I just pull it out slightly, and then I pull out slightly more, and then I pull it up. You'll see this on screen as well. So it's a pretty easy process, and there shouldn't be any tension or force when you're pulling the CPU out after the lever is up. Alright, so now it's time to go to my normal computer, my everyday computer, and it's time to take the 1500X I've got in there and take it out. So it's the same process as before. It's the same AM4 socket. So on this one, I've actually got a EK waterblock AIO on it, so I'm just going to unscrew the thumb nuts and make sure they're all out, make sure the springs have come out properly as well, and lift it out evenly on all sides, and it's pretty easy to do that. Same process with the 3700X on the A520M board when I'm taking the CPU out. So clean it off nicely, make sure it's all good, or because I'm not going to use it, I might leave the thermal paste on there and clean it later. But what I'm going to do here is, as again, pull the lever out to the side a little bit and then push up, and then the CPU should be free. Now take the CPU out, and now since I'm going to be using this AIO heatsink, I'm going to clean it off very thoroughly and make sure it's all clean, ready to go. Making sure not any contaminants come on it, as it can get a bit wet, such as dust or hair from pets or anything like that. Just making sure it's nice and clean is good. And basically from there I install the 3700X itself, and all I do is I match up the corner gold triangle to the triangle on the motherboard, and I place it down nicely, not too harshly, just place it down firmly in there, and make sure it's in the pins have actually gone properly into the AM4 socket, and I make sure of that, and then I push the leave it down, and just underneath the little notch there, just make sure it's good. And I give the CPU a little bit of a good wiggle and make sure it's in nicely. So once the CPU is in, it's a relatively easy process from there. All I gotta do is install the AIO back on. This AIO is a bit fiddly with the tubes, so make sure you have the tubes in the right orientation before you put any thermal paste on. So I'm pretty sure for this one I used Noctua NTH1 and or Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut, but I don't think I had any of that left, so I'm pretty sure I used Noctua NTH1 again. Pretty decent compound, I haven't had any issues with it, and I just put a pretty decent size on the CPU, you'll see it on screen. And then I press the AIO firmly down on the CPU, the heatsink down on the CPU, sorry, the AIO heatsink. And then I proceed to put the springs and the thumb nuts back on, at the same time holding the AIO heatsink back on. So now it's the moment of truth. Is this computer gonna post or is it gonna fail? So I know the CPU is working, and if my computer doesn't post, it means I've done something wrong and something gone seriously wrong, which doesn't happen. As you can see on screen, the PC posts really nicely and no problems at all. Fans didn't spin up at the start, and computer's working well. So I can say for a fact that the CPU does work with my B350M-A. Just a word of warning, do not overclock the CPU on this motherboard. That is not a good idea, and yeah, I would highly not recommend it. That's pretty dangerous, to be honest with you. A few other notes actually. I also upgraded my power supply to account with a 980 Ti with a 3700X. So I upgraded from a 600 watt power supply right up to a 750 watt RMX 750. So it's a good quality power supply that has good quality components from Japan. And the Corsair RM750X is really good quality, so I'd highly recommend it from what I've used so far. And as well, also make sure if you're using this on another motherboard, like an older motherboard such as I am with a B350 or something like that, make sure your BIOS is actually compatible of running the CPU, so you will need to update it to make sure it's able to include the CPU, otherwise you'll have problems with posting and you have to just uninstall your CPU and put the old one back in and then upgrade it again. So do make sure you're on the correct BIOS version, because that's pretty important as well. You can check that on your motherboard manufacturer's website. You'll see this in another video coming up soon, but yeah, the 3700X performs extremely well. It's super quick, and I noticed an immediate difference in my PC's performance. Going from 4 cores and 8 threads to 8 cores, 16 threads is incredible. My PC performs extremely quickly, and with tasks such as rendering videos or even multitasking sometimes, the added cores and the extra threads as well, it just helps so much. Even in a game like Assassin's Creed Origins is one of the main kickers of why I got the CPU, and as well editing and things like that. But yeah, I noticed an immediate increase. I was locked down to nearly 45-50 FPS on a 980 Ti and a 1500X. And as soon as I put the 3700X with a 980 Ti graphics card, I went straight up to around about 65 to 75 FPS on average, and that's quite a significant performance boost. Mind you, though, my RAM is only DDR4 2400, so realistically I would upgrade to something like DDR4 3200 CL14 or 3600 CL14. Just so the CPU is able to operate with faster speed RAM, but you know, I can't really afford that at the moment, and my motherboard is kind of old, so I'd probably be looking to do a motherboard and memory upgrade maybe next year, and if I'm looking to overclock or anything like that. But for now, my PC I think is pretty decent for me. And yeah, I managed to snag this bargain, $330 New Zealand, or 350, like around there, for a secondhand 3700X that was barely used off TradeMe. I think is an awesome deal at the moment compared to any other CPU on the market, at least in New Zealand. So really good snag. So yeah. So that about sums up the video. Thank you guys very much for watching. Make sure you go and check out wisentech.org for the latest post reviews and much more. See you guys there at wisentech.org. But other than that, hope you guys have an awesome day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.